All right, welcome back to Emoji Economics YouTube channel. So, in our last class, I introduced us to this particular data set. So, the values are in not finding the percentages though, because I was on, I just calculated that. So, the values normally they are in billions of naira, and this data set is actually in basic prices, current basic prices. So, the title is Sectoral Contribution to GDP over 5 decades. So the denominator now is going to be current basic prices. So and the amounts they are in billions of naira. So this is not dollars. Thank you. So I was about to say something. Now you might be wondering, basic price. What's a basic price? So when we value a product at basic price, so what we are saying is that the value of the product after it has been produced, in addition to the subsidy that the company, whatever company that produced it, obtained, then excluding taxes, right? So like the value of the product plus subsidy minus taxes. So that's basically what basic price is. So it has an alternative. It has an opposite measure, which is market price. So market price is just the value of something. So it's the reverse, like the value of something in addition to taxes. Okay, then minus subsidy. So you have to get these two things. These are things that you learn from introduction to macroeconomics. So when you are doing your national income accounting, so it's just the application that you are having in this particular one. So here we have the data sets, and I must tell you something. I think I should tell you something. Students can be very funny. Please don't cram these data sets. Don't memorize it. So if we were to have an examination, um, worst that I think could happen at this stage is for um, your lecturer to give you a table, okay, a table like this, and then what you'd have to do is to tell a story with the table. So that's what you will call analysis. You trying to analyze the data that you've been given. So what I think you should know is the story, like the story behind the figures. So those are the things you should know because um, by the time you start analyzing your data, so if it has to be in line with um, a particular narrative. Okay, for example, in the Nigerian situation, okay, by like we are going to be doing that in a bit. Agriculture was the mainstay of Nigeria at um, in Nigeria's early history, then it's moved to something else. Or is it still the mainstay on, or something like that? So if you have a data set, let's say like starting from 1910, okay, and it is the data is showing, or as you're analyzing it, you are saying that agriculture was not really the mainstay. There's a way you know if something is the mainstay or not of Nigeria as at that particular period of time. But every other story, every research has shown it. Okay, Nigeria's history has shown it that in its very early stages, Nigeria was um, dependent on agriculture. So now that your data is saying something different, so that means something is either wrong with the data or you're not interpreting it the correct way. Okay, so like I said, what you have to know is the narrative, the story behind a data set. So you don't have to go and cram this because some of you are so good at cramming. You can cram these old figures if you have written them here. You don't need them. All right. So now let's start. Um, so we have the three sectors, like I mentioned in the last class. So I've not included as subsectors, but basically agri has four subsectors: crop farming, livestock, fishery, and then forestry. Then industry has subsectors as well. I think in the last slide, I think I will be mentioned how many of them manufacturing, whatever, whatever. But by the time you look at the subsectors under manufacturing and other subsectors as well, we'll be having like up to 20 subsectors under industry as that this particular year. Then under services, there are also a lot of subsectors. I think maybe 22 of them or thereabout. But we are not looking at the subsectors basically. We are just looking at the sectors themselves. So in 1981, so what I did was, you are not going to see this data like this in the National Bureau of Statistics annual reports of 2021. So I just collected data over um, 50 years, so like 10-year gap. So 1981, 1991, 2001, 2011, 2021. So I want to use it to tell a story. So in 1981, which was shortly after independence, that shortly, independence was 1960, so 21 years after independence. So the agricultural sector contributed 17.05 billion naira to the country's GDP, and industry contributed 54.67 billion naira to the country's GDP, and services contributed 66.20. So the total GDP for that year was 139.31. 10 years later, Nigeria's total GDP increased to 584.25, which is like maybe three times the GDP of 1981. And then by the time we look at the sectoral contributions, agri's contribution rose from 17.05 to 123.24. Okay, then industry rose from 54.67 to 218, and so on and so forth. So by the time looking at these things like in their absolute forms may not really tell us the story that we want. So I converted them to percentages. So you are not going to see the percentage values in the data set. So this is one way. I'm already teaching you how to do analysis, right? So on my own, I converted this whole thing into percentages so that we'll be able to tell the story properly with in percentage values or with their percentage values. So in 1981, we can see that agri contributed 12.24% to the country's GDP, and the industrial sector contributed 39.24% to the country's GDP, while services contributed 47.52% to the country's GDP. So that's to tell you that when you look at the total outputs in the Nigerian economy, that particular period of time, services contributed the most, right, value to the country's GDP. Then in 1991, we see from the board that the sectoral contribution of agri sector rose from 12.24 to 21.09. So it's almost doubled, right, after 10 years. If you look at industry fell, industry sectoral contribution fell to 37.33, and on like that. So if we are saying our story, we can start from saying that the agricultural sector's sectoral combination rose in 2001. Okay, it rose in 1991 and 2001. Then it fell in 2011 and rose again in 2021. So if you want to tell a better story, you can then take the averages. Okay, so you kind of add the five percentages, we divided by five, and you measure the average. So if the average, let's say, with the look of things, the average might be around maybe 20% or less than, or maybe slightly less than 20, or around 20%. So if you calculate it, so you can say that agricultural agricultural sectors um, GDP contribution over 5 decades, starting from 1981, on average was 20%. So that's if I've added all of these things and divided them by five. About the story on agriculture, I should have done that, but I didn't. Taking the average values over 5 years. Now, industry, what is the sectoral combination of the industrial sector to Nigeria's economy? So, in you can say that it was looking at this data sets, the industrial sector contribution to GDP was highest in 1981, which is obvious. It was highest because this is 39.24, 37, whatever, whatever, like that, then to 31. So it was highest, so that's a point. You scored the point. So it was highest in 1981, and it's began to fail until 2021 when it rose again. So from 1981, industry's contribution to GDP fell. Okay, it fell and it dipped in 2011. At least it was the lowest in 2011 before it took up, to 31.87%. So if this were maybe a proper data analysis now that you're doing, and you want to tell a very complete story, so what you are going to look at is what happened, to the industrial sector. So like what happened in the so like the data set has shown you something. So you now start to like research, okay, start to read, consult a lot of things online and stuff like that. So what happened? Why did the sectoral contribution of the industrial sector fall? And what probably happened? Why did it just jump to 31.87 in 2021? Was that as a result of a particular policy or a set of policies, or what were the things that happened? Or Nigeria experienced a very good period, or maybe there was an industrial revolution and stuff like that. So those are part of the things that you can talk about. But since this is an introductory course, like you don't need all of those things. I'm just talking about a period where you are probably in your final year, you understand, and you've collected data, you are doing your project. So if you have something like this, you have to like talk about them, what happened, right? So then you can also talk about the average value. So here you have 39, 37, 20, it's whatever like that. So looking at this, the average value would likely fall around maybe 32, yeah, maybe 32, 33%. So that means the average contribution of the average GDP contribution of the industrial sector within this specified uh, years is 33 point something percent. So how do you calculate that? That's not the value, right? I'm just guessing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 divided by 5, then you get the value. So that's that. Now for services, so how do you analyze services as well? We look at services. When was the GDP contribution the highest? So you have the highest value in 2011. Okay, so the highest GDP contribution of service sector was in 2011. So when it's contributed, when it had the 49.5, almost 50% contribution to the country's GDP, and its lowest value over this data set over this period, its lowest value was in 1991. All right. So the experience is lowest value. So you can do that for all of them. Lowest value, lowest highest average, right? Lowest ISOD. For agric, the lowest was in 1981. Then it began to improve. So it began to improve, and it fell in 2011 and improved again in 2021. All right. So industry was kind of deteriorating in its you know sectoral contribution to GDP until 2021 when it picked up again. Okay, but not as its value. It has not been able to return to its position, its 1981 position. So what was the highest, lowest, and then the average? Services the same thing. Highest, lowest, average. So that's what you've just done is called descriptive statistics. You have the so you're just talking, just explaining, or is it explaining? You're not really explaining, you're just describing. Okay, this happened, you're telling us what is obviously in the data set, but you're using words, to communicate your idea. So now that's not even where we are going to, because what we want to do is to compare the three sectors. The three sectors. So as at 1981, the sector that had the highest GDP contribution was services. It had 47.52. You understand? And you would see that over time, from 1981 to 2021, services has the highest contribution to GDP. So 47, 41, 46, 49, 44. So if you take the average now, the average will probably be around 45% contribution to GDP. So like services, so you can say that over this period, the service sector in Nigeria contributed highest to GDP. Okay, and followed by industry, obviously. You understand? If you take the average, so it's better for you to just take the average value and talk with the average value. So the average here is like 45. I'm just saying 45, maybe 43, between 43 to 45. The average here maybe 30 something, and the average here maybe 20, maybe 20, 21 or thereabout because of 12. 12 is really low compared to the rest. So it might not be up to 20. It might be 15 in the way I'm looking at it. So like agriculture's contribution to the country's GDP, fell, you know, over this period. So agricultural sector contributed the least to the country's GDP, followed by industry, then service, contributed the highest. All right, so those are the things that you talk about when you're analyzing data. So the highest, the lowest, like you're looking at them individually, highest, lowest, average. Okay, agri, industry, services, highest, low. So you're talking about 9 things on their own like that. Then you now compare agri to industry, compare industry to services, stuff like that. So just begin to apply your common sense. and before you know it, you have like 1 or 2 pages of of descriptions. So your lecturer will pick the one he wants. Okay, now what is Nigeria's mainstay? Okay, so when we say mainstay, there's something I want to clarify with this class. As at this particular period of time, if you ask some people, what is Nigeria's mainstay? They will say agriculture. Is it really agriculture? So what is the definition of a mainstay? Okay, so a mainstay is something that is so important that every other thing depends on it. Okay, so which means if we say that a sector is a mainstay of an economy, if that sector fails, every other thing fails, right? And if that sector succeeds, every other thing likely succeeds with the right policies anyway and the right attitude. But if the sector fails, you don't even probably need right policies or not. Every other thing is going to come crashing down. So if you look at the way things are in Nigeria currently, can you see it is agriculture? Now, there are things that we consider even to know if a sector is a country's mainstay. You look at its GDP contribution, you look at its contribution to employment, and then you look at its what do you call it now? Its contribution to foreign exchange earnings. Okay, so like, are you getting the most dollars from this particular sector? So for people who still think that agriculture is Nigeria's mainstay, I would use this class to argue that it is not. As far as 2023 is concerned, agriculture is, if there are a lot of things happening to the agricultural sector right now, and we are having issues like food insecurity and stuff like that, but they are still kind of finding our way around those things. But there's a sector, there's one of our subsector that if something happens to it, we are going to feel the pain, and that is our oil sector. Yeah, that's our oil sector. So now I have some things here that I think we should consider. So I have key points. I call them key points. So these are things I think you should know. Yeah, you should know these things. Now I have different data sources. So like I said, I think I mentioned it before. In this particular course, we'll be citing data. So like verifiable data. After I think in this particular class, I'm supposed to leave links, maybe 2 links or thereabouts in the description of this video, because your assignments will also be related. You'll be using those data, the data sets to do your assignments. You understand? So you have to get yourself acquainted with data from whatever level you are watching this video at right now. Okay, so number one key point: agriculture was the country's mainstay prior oil discovery in the 19. The oil was discovered in the 1970s in Nigeria, and the kind of oil that Nigeria has and sells is bonylite or bonylite. I don't know the correct pronunciation now. Bonny, then normal lights. Okay, spelling of light. So bonylite. So it was discovered maybe in 1973 or thereabout. Is it 1973 or 1953 or no? 1970, I think 1973 at Oloibiri, Oloibiri. I think 1970 something Oloibiri. So before that period, agriculture was Nigeria's mainstay, and then we are going to see the sources. So agriculture was the country's mainstay prior oil discovery in the 1970s. So the average contribution to GDP of the agricultural sector was 57%. Now you can see that from here, average, if we calculate the average here now, the average will be around 15%. But between let me just read it to the end. You have average of 57% GDP contribution and 64.5% export earnings between 1960 and 1969. Now, this particular data set was obtained from an article by PwC. All right, so that's big auditing accounting firm that provides a lot of services, a lot of professional services to its clients. There might be other companies or maybe the government and stuff like that. So one of those big four, right? So, you know, I got this data from one of the articles. So that it's saying that between the period of 1960 and 1969, so agriculture contributed 57% to GDP. All right, and it contributed 64.5% to our export earnings. That is, we were getting 64.5% of our dollars, of our foreign exchange, from the sale of agricultural output. So that's what it's saying. So that means this period, agriculture was really the mainstay, because if we could be get this is more than half. This is like 65%, all right, of the total foreign currency that you have coming from a particular sector. So here you can see agriculture is the mainstay. So that was, so you understand, between 1960 and 1969. And now let's continue. The average, so I just use this to, I don't want to rewrite the whole thing. So there is an average of 23.5% GDP contribution and 5.1% export earnings in the past 5 years. So this is 2021 or thereabouts. So like when the article was written was like 2021. So past five that's past 5 years. That should be like from 2016. So from 2016, okay, the average um, sectoral contribution of the agri sector to the country's GDP fell from 57%, understand, in the 1960s to 23.5%. And then export earnings, that was 64.5% before, has fallen dramatically to 5.1%. Like how many percent decrease is that? Understand? So like this is a whole lot. So now here between 2016 and 2021, as agric is no longer um, the source of Nigeria's, is no longer the major source of Nigeria's export earnings. Now, why? Why did that happen? In 2022, okay, there's another data. In 2022, oil, which is a subsector of um, industry. So oil GDP contribution was 6.63%. So the oil subsector was contributing 6.63% to Nigeria's, GDP. All right, but let's look at the export earnings. And export earnings was 95%. So in 2022 alone, Nigeria got 95% of its foreign currency from oil. So you can see. So that means agric and services have to share the remaining 5%, foreign exchange contribution to the countries. So you can, and this is from National Bureau of Statistics. So this data is from National Bureau of Statistics. All right. So from here, they can deduce, you understand that agriculture is no longer Nigeria's foreign exchange earner. Okay, so now it has fallen to oil. Now, maybe one other detail I should have added is maybe in the past 10 years or 20 years, which sector has contributed the most. And if you look at it, if you go and look for that data or from a verifiable source, you would see that in the last 10, 20 years, the oil subsector has contributed between 70 to 80%, or 70 to 90%. No, not 90%, between 70 to 80%, you know, to Nigeria's export earnings. Between 70 to 80%. So like for a long time, oil has been our major foreign exchange earner as much as Nigeria is concerned for a long time. Okay, so now here I was telling you that mainstay can be, it can explain a mainstay from GDP contribution, from foreign exchange earnings, and from employment. Okay, so how is a particular sector how is it faring in these three areas? Okay, but technically speaking, the definition of a mainstay is, okay. Let me read what I have here. So mainstay on its own, mainstay of an economy is the most important part of the economy that is providing support for everything else. Okay, the most important part of the economy that is providing support for everything else. So here, the mainstay of your economy is what is even footing the budget of your country, of a particular country. So what he's saying is that the mainstay is where you get the most money from, where you get the most value from. And there's something I think I should explain. I was talking about oil contribution was 6.63% to GDP, and then 95% to export earnings. Like how? How is that possible? you know, but it's possible because that's to tell you that when you look at everything that Nigeria produces, in addition to oil now, so oil's portion of everything Nigeria produces, which is the GDP, is just 6.63%. But when you go to the global market, where these things are sold as exports, because oil commands a very high price usually on the global market, so that is why it is generating up to 95% of our export earnings. So if you look at agricultural produce, for example, now they are just natural stuff. So value added is, no, they don't command a very high value international market, you are talking about crops. You understand? You're talking about cassava, cocoa, and granules, palm oil, stuff like that. So they are not as valuable as oil right now. No, right now, okay, in the global market. So that's why. So if you were to sell maybe 50 kilograms of granules, for example, and let's say we are measuring oil as well in kilograms. That's now they measure it, though it's in barrels. But now we are assuming that we are measuring it in the kilograms. So 50 kilograms of granules is going to fetch less amount of money on the global market compared to 50 kilograms of oil. So oil commands like very high price globally. Okay, so that's why. Okay, that's why. Now let us look at employment. Employment in agriculture, this data you don't have them from here, you understand? But I just want to like have an overview of the Nigerian economy. Employment in agriculture in 1991. Now I got this data from World Development Indicators. Okay, or yeah, so WDI. So that's what it's usually called. Now, if you want to look for WDI data, you can just say employment in agriculture in Nigeria. Like just type it on Google. Employment in agriculture in Nigeria. Then WDI. Put WDI in front and search. So it's going to bring something that you can get data from. So, and if it's not called employment in, so whatever the title is going to be, so the title might be sectoral contribution to employment. So that might be the title by the time you look it up on Google or whatever search engine you are using. So it brings it out, then you are able to get to the data set. Then I think it's better to download. So when you download, like you see what's happening in other countries. And these are things that you're going to get used to anyway. Don't worry. Don't worry. Now, employment in agriculture in 1991, it was 50.57%. That means 50.57% of the people that were working in Nigeria were employed in the agricultural sector. But by the time it was 2019, because that was where we could like get the data through, then it was 2019, it had fallen to 34.97%. So now you don't have as much people in agriculture as you used to have. Okay. Then in 2019, the same 2019, the service sector employment contribution was 53.03%. So which is telling us that people have moved from agriculture, some people have moved from agriculture. There has been a movement of labor from agriculture to the service sector. So now the service sector is now the major employer of labor as far as Nigeria is concerned. Now, okay, this is 2019 though, but if you're able to get data like till this particular period, this is still what you're gonna be seeing, something like this. All right, the labor contribution of agriculture to employment is shrinking, but that of service is growing. Then what happens to our industrial sector? What level of employment do you have in the industrial sector? Now, the service sector employment contribution was 40% in 2002. So as far as 2002, it was already 40%. Then and has been at least 50% since 2014. So from 2014 till whenever now, like the um, service sector has been contributing 50%, at least 50%. So it might be 50 point something, 51 point something, whatever like that. So now the current scheme of things as far as Nigeria is concerned is that the service sector is the biggest employer of labor in Nigeria. Okay, so and according to another data source now, according to Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative NEITI, oil employment contribution was 0.03% in 2018. Now this is now like what's going on? Oil is a major foreign exchange earner, but it's contributing less than half percent to the country's employment. Like this was 2018 thereabout anyway, but if you look at other things that are happening, if you look at other years, it's still not going to be far from this figure at maybe at most maybe 1%. So what it is saying is that the story behind this is that the oil industry is a highly mechanized industry. Like it uses a lot of machines compared to human beings. You understand? So if you have a booming oil sector, you have relatively you have fewer persons in the oil sector compared to other sectors. But those fewer persons are like rich. You understand? Because they're in the richest subsector of the economy. They are very, rich compared to others. Just less than 1%, but they are it's from their sector that we are, or from their subsector that we are getting the highest, foreign exchange into the country. So it's not employing a lot of people. So that's just the story. It's not employing a lot of people. So you might have been hearing on the news or whatever that Nigeria wants to diversify. Nigeria is talking about diversification. So what is diversification? What is going on? So why is Nigeria not comfortable with oil being its major foreign exchange earner? So Nigeria can't be comfortable because it's not employing a lot of its populace. So it's just employing few people, but those few people are wealthy. You understand? So it's not an inclusive, like it makes your export earnings very high, but it's not kind of helping as many people as possible. So it's causing crisis in the Nigerian economy. You understand? So that's just the story behind what is a lot of things going on in Nigeria now. When you hear economic diversification and stuff like that, so Nigeria is trying to push other sectors and make sure they work, especially the manufacturing sector, subsector now. Nigeria is pushing, it wants to make it work because these are sectors that employ people. And when you're able to employ people, your unemployment rate falls, you understand, then standard of living of people begin to rise because now they are earning income and so on and so forth. So a lot of things begin to happen, a lot of transformation begin to happen. And then your economy even starts to produce real things. I'm not saying crude oil is not real, but okay, let me say things that have very high value addition. Because this oil now is crude. You understand? Just the way we are getting it from the soil, you understand, or from land as a resource now. That way, it's raw form, we take it and then or maybe do it a little work on it and then we export because it commands high value. You understand? So our manufacturing sector is not really doing much on that, oil. So it's just like someone dashing you money, or someone dashing you something, someone give you access to something that dashes you money. So you're not really doing a lot of work. You just go and pack it and go and sell it because it commands a very high value and then you get money. You get a lot of it, crazy amount of money. You understand? So it's not employing a lot of people and so on and so forth. Nigeria is just trying. So later, I don't know if it's going to be in this particular course, but later on, we should be talking about economic diversification. What has Nigeria done so far, so good. So now we've looked at this thing. So my final note on this is that um, agriculture is no longer the mainstay of the Nigerian economy. So what's our mainstay right now is oil. Why? That is where we are getting the most money from. You understand? So the mainstay of your economy is where you are getting the most money from. That's like the superior criteria. So it's not just if it gives you the most employment or if it contributes the most to your GDP and stuff like that. Is where are you getting the most money from? So that's just it. So initially it was agri because of 64.5%, major, foreign earnings and stuff like that. And that was complemented by the amount of people it was employing. But now it is oil, and 95% is something else. So it's just telling us that our agriculture and our other sectors are not really doing well. So when we talk about the global market. Alright, so even if it's your lecturer that is arguing that agriculture is still Nigeria's mainstay and maybe it's employing 70% people, agriculture is not employing 70%. That's not what the data is saying. So as before, that was probably employing up to 70% of the population. I don't have that data, I couldn't get it. So the one I could get was the one from 1991 on WDI. So that one I can talk about that okay, at some point, um, employment agriculture was almost 51%. That's what I can say. So I can't talk about the 70% because I don't have a data source, to back it up. But at least 51% is still like telling the story. Because 51 is like the majority. You understand? So but now it has shrunk. It's not even close to 70, it has shrunk 34.97. And in 2023 it has probably shrunk more than this. Or maybe around this figure. A lot of people don't want to work in farms anyway. Yeah, so that's that. So now we'll be talking about the export and import profile of Nigeria based on another data set. Okay, and we'll also be talking about I think economic complexity or something like that. Okay, but I'll leave that to another video. So you'll be having an assignment but the assignment is not here, so it's going to be in the other video. So in this class, I've taught you um, how to analyze data set if you are given a data. So as a recap, you look at if you are given something like this for each sector, okay, if you have nominal figures like here, okay, you can start with the total figure. What is the total for agri? I didn't put the total, but you can add it. The total um, contribution of agri over 5 decades. So this plus this plus this plus this plus this, you calculate it. So how many billions of naira is it? You write it. So you calculate total for industry and total for services. So you are done with that. Then you look at highest and lowest for each of the sector. So it's lowest here, and then it's began to rise, and it kept on rising for agri. So where do you have the highest? You have the highest in 2021. Okay, then you can also talk about the average figure. So you understand like that. So you do the addition of the nominal figure, then you look for um, highest and lowest figures. Did I say nominal? I meant absolute figures, highest and lowest. Then you look at average figure. You understand? Then you can also convert them to percentages to tell the story clearer. I think it's better that way. So you do that for each of them. So you have like 12 things to talk about. After you are done, then you compare three sectors. So you have like maybe 12 to 13, 14, 15 things to talk about. Then in addition to whatever idea that you also have that you want to talk about. So that is a way to analyze data when you're giving the task. You can just be giving something and they will tell you, talk about this. So what can you say about this? So those are the things that they are looking for. So I just told you all of these things at least for you to understand some background stuff that have been happening in Nigeria. Okay, for example, agric was our mainstay before, it's no longer our mainstay now. What is our mainstay? Agric was employing the most labor before, it's no longer employing the most labor. That goes to the service sector. You understand? And so that's it. So that's it. So once again, when you are working with macroeconomics, you may not get all your data sets from a particular source, but ensure that you get them from verifiable sources. And again, data might be missing, data might be incomplete. So there's a way you do that if you were to do analysis, but if your data is incomplete, just work with the latest data you have and ensure that it is telling a good story. Right. So that's it. So in the next class, we'll finalize what we have to talk about in introduction to the Nigerian economy. I didn't even know it was going to be up to 3 classes. I was thinking just 2. All right, bye bye. See you.